point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 289th edition of Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell. Tom, unfortunately, is not in today. He's got a cold. We hope that he'll get over that soon. We are starting with news on October 25th, news that appeared at my blog on October 25th. I get up every day. First thing I do is work on my blog, which is related to energy and climate change. And I look for news items. I search CNN, BBC, Clean Technica. You'll hear that name often on this show. And then I go through general searches for energy, renewable energy, nuclear power, climate change, and things of that nature. And everything that I find that I think is interesting, with a limit of really 15 different items, for each of them I put together a 50 or 55 word long synopsis and a link to the original article. So I'm going to be talking about articles here, and you can go to my blog, geoharvey.com, geoharvey.com, and go to the date that I will try to keep you apprised of for these various items. And you can click on the original and go to it, hopefully. I check the links to make sure that they will go to a computer other than mine. When you do a search and you go to a website, the website knows where your search is coming from. And sometimes it'll let you in if it's on a search. Sometimes it will not. Sometimes it will let you in on the first day and not on the second, or the first week and not on the second. And so what I try to do is each time I put a link up, I try to test it on a computer that identifies itself to the website differently. So I've got to have my computer and then a virtual computer doing this. We're going to start today on October 25th. Today, as I'm recording this, is November 1st. We start a week earlier. And the first item here is from CNN. I'm going to show you a picture. This article is titled, "Exxon Systematically Misled Investors," New York Attorney General says. For years, ExxonMobil duped shareholders about the serious threat its fossil fuels empire faces from the global crackdown on carbon emissions, according to a lawsuit filed by a New York Attorney General. The lawsuit alleges that Exxon executed a long-standing fraudulent scheme. Now, this is something that actually relates to things that they were very clear to me when they were happening in real time. About 2 years ago, Exxon, still under the leadership of Rex Tillerson, told its investors at the annual stockholding meeting, you don't have to worry about stranded assets. We aren't going to have any stranded assets. And that caused quite a stir in the media that was reporting on climate change at that time, because they couldn't figure out how he could believe that Exxon would not have stranded assets. Only about 3-4 months later, Exxon announced that it would not be, that it would be writing down all of its investments, assets in Canadian tar sands, because it would never be able to get its money out of them. And it seemed to be clear that the investors were in fact not being told what was going on, because that write-down must have been in the works at the time. So the Attorney General, looking at that and other things, is talking about the fact that the entire fossil fuels industry is facing a situation in which only about 20% of the assets that they own that are in the ground can be allowed to be burned because of the emissions that they have that are causing climate change. And at some point, they just have to stop burning them, or we're going to have runaway climate change. We're already in a point where scientists are saying that we have to get proactive about removing carbon from the atmosphere, and there's a lot of research being done on that. Our next item comes from Scientific American, and the title of the story is Oil Spill Settlement Pays for Climate Curriculum in Gulf States. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine is spending a part of a $500 million oil spill settlement to provide climate change education at middle and high school levels in Gulf Coast communities vulnerable to sea level rise and other climate threats. This is money which came from the oil spill in the Gulf several years ago. And the $500 million settlement is going, as this makes clear, part of it to educating students about how sea level rise makes them and their families, the land that they live on, vulnerable. And this is something that, on the national level, perhaps the political leaders are still claiming that the sea level isn't rising, or it is and we can't do anything about it, or whatever position they want to take. The fact is that the local governments in places like Louisiana have been telling people that the sea is rising. They have to be prepared to move. And there is a disconnect here between what's happening at the national level, what's happening at the level of local people who are guided by the national level, and what's happening at the local level. Certainly the very conservative Republican government of Louisiana is telling the people in that state who live close to the Gulf that they're going to have to move. Cameron Parish, Tom and I have talked about this many times. The people in Cameron Parish have basically been told Cameron Parish is going to have to be evacuated permanently within a certain number of years. I don't remember, but it might have been 30 years. At any rate, all of those people are going to have to move. Cameron Parish is a county-sized part of Louisiana, which is the southwesternmost county-sized parish in the state, and it, of all the counties in the United States, is the one that had the highest percentage of pro-Trump voters in the last election. It'll be interesting to see what that parish is going to do in the next election. So, our next item here is from Alaska Public Radio Network. I've got an item to put up a picture here. And this is the Buckland Solar Array in Buckland, Alaska. This is from Alaska Public Service Network, and the title is A Solar Project in Rural Alaska Takes Aim at Sky-High Electric Bills. A renewable energy project in northwest Alaskan village of Buckland aims to demonstrate solar and wind power's potential to reduce the region's sky-high utility costs. 3 solar arrays will switch on this week, and a battery system is coming next year. I haven't seen anything about installation of wind turbines, but clearly they're thinking about it. Those arrays are interesting, partly because they happen to be sitting on a very unusual base. And I'm not sure if that base turns or if the base is intended perhaps to hold batteries. But the situation in Alaska is one in which the villages are so small and the distances between them are so great that it does not make sense to have a grid that is supplying electricity to the people. So what they do is they have local grids that are operated typically by diesel power. And diesel power is expensive. The cost of diesel oil is multiplied by the fact that the oil has to be brought in by some means, such as by truck, by aircraft, perhaps in some cases by boat, to provide power for people. And so these rural communities in Alaska have historically had the highest electric costs of any areas of the United States, among the highest. And they see that solar power in Alaska is a way to save money. And it'll be interesting to see what they do to bring that up to the point where it's operating 24/7, 52 weeks a year, because obviously they're not going to be getting much solar power in the winter. Anyway, we are up to Friday, October 26th. We have an item from Renew Economy. The title is Sodium-Ion Batteries to Pump Bondi Storage in Test of Cheaper Lithium-Ion Alternative. A project developed at the University of Wollongong is underway to test a comparable low-cost alternative to a lithium-ion batteries. The sodium-ion battery packs are in use after commissioning of the project this week. Wollongong is a town in Australia. I don't remember which Australian state it's in, but the Australians have been, and we've reported this on this show, have been interested in sodium-ion batteries for quite a long time, and they have been developing them in their universities for quite a long time. The problem with sodium-ion is it's basically the same kind of chemistry as lithium-ion, except sodium ions are much, much bigger. Sodium atoms are much, much bigger than lithium atoms. So switching the chemistry from lithium ion to sodium ion is not just a matter of using a different liquid. You have to have places where the sodium ions can rest, as it were, in the same way that lithium ions rest in the matrix of the cathode or anode in the lithium-ion battery. And the result of this is that you have to have, among other things, a very much bigger battery, physically larger, perhaps slightly heavier, but certainly lithium is, for reasons that have to do apparently with the Big Bang and what happened afterwards, lithium is a rare element. And sodium obviously is not. You know, you've got a lot of sodium in your salt shaker. So the question of how you can use lithium instead of sodium has become important. Our next item is from Green Tech Media, and it is the title is Oil and Gas Majors Need to Invest $20 billion Yearly to Dominate in Renewables. Majors, this is the big oil and gas companies, account for a 15% share of the global oil and gas market. If these majors want to capture the same market share in renewables, it would require them to collectively invest $200 billion, according to a new report from Wood Mackenzie. Again, we're back to a situation where the big oil and gas companies, if you look at them, you can see that some of them, I should put that picture up, it's kind of a nice picture. Some of them, okay, come on, there we go. Some of them have been denying that climate change is a problem. They, like ExxonMobil under Rex Tillerson, were saying there aren't going to be any stranded assets. Some of them, on the other hand, are investing and have been investing for a long time in renewable energy. BP is one of those. Royal Dutch Shell it's hard to know what these people have got on their minds. It's an easy thing to see that they are thinking to themselves, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars worth of oil, coal, gas, or whatever in the ground. And we should be taking that out of the ground and selling it. But the problem is that climate change is going to happen faster as this stuff is sold. So the estimate is, as I mentioned earlier in the show, they can only sell about 20% of what they own before the climate is honestly, it's already in deep trouble. But they have a very small budget of what they can sell. The world has a small budget of what it can buy. And some of these oil companies are pursuing, trying to sell their product. Others, like possibly BP, possibly Shell, are doing things a different way. But they're going to have to spend, according to this article, $200 billion in order to keep themselves up to date. We have an item here from the Washington Examiner next. The title is "More and More Democrats Are Running on a Total Phase-Out of Fossil Fuels." And the content says more than 1,400 Democrat candidates running for every level of office this November have committed to some form of a goal to mandate 100% clean, zero emissions electricity in their state by 2050, according to the League of Conservation Voters. Honestly, 100% of our electricity from clean sources is not going to be enough, I think. We need to get 100% clean transportation. We need to get 100% clean heat and cooling. We need to get as much of the fossil fuels as we can out of our industrial production. And that means that we're going to have to go much, much farther than 100% of our electricity. It means 100% of our electricity, but we're going to have a lot more electricity than we've got in order to keep all the cars in the country going when they're electric cars, and all the houses heated when they're heated electrically. So we are up to Saturday, October 27th, and we have another picture here. This is a picture of ocean fish, and let me put that up. The title of the article is "The Fate of the Ocean, Our Ocean Conference." And the article comes from the Council on Foreign Relations, which, with much of the world's attention now fixated on climate change, the Our Ocean Conference on the island of Bali is a great opportunity to address the health of the oceans and garner commitments to save it from the scourges of pollution, overfishing, and transnational crime. The problems that we've got here include the fact that the oceans are receptacles. They're used as receptacles for all kinds of trash that's being dumped. The amount of plastics that are floating around in the oceans has become really almost legendary. There are places in the Pacific Ocean where, from a boat, it looks almost like you're in the middle of a shore-based junkyard, because it's just trash as far as the eye can see, and that trash is plastic. Over 80% of the seabirds in the world apparently have plastic in their stomachs, and they can't get rid of it. So eventually, if they keep eating plastic, they're going to die of starvation. It's happening fairly frequently. We have to do something about this. And on the flip side, human beings eat a lot of fish. They need a lot of fish. They're dependent on the oceans not just for fish, but other things too, including seaweed and other things, and shellfish. We use a lot of stuff from our oceans, and in order to make that use secure, we're going to have to keep the oceans clean. And we're not going to keep the oceans clean if politicians stand in the way. So that's why this Our Ocean Conference took place on Bali. The next item that we have is from CNN, and the title is GM pushes National Electric Car Plan as Trump tries to roll back emissions standards. In response to an administration proposal to roll back fuel economy requirements, General Motors is calling for the federal government to start a nationwide program to put EVs on the road modeled on California's zero-emission vehicle program. The CNN article doesn't really address this, but other articles that accompanied this, that came the next day, the day after, and so forth, say things like, I wonder if the CEO of General Motors really intends to switch to EVs as quickly as possible, or whether this is a way of trying to move a standard into place that will allow them to switch to EVs, excuse me, in a way that's more, let's say, planned. Switching to EVs is going to cost a lot of money. And they don't want to spend all that money at once. I think I should mention we have a problem in this country with electric vehicles that other countries don't have. And the place where I think this is the most obvious is in electric buses. But in electric cars, half of the electric cars that are sold in the world are sold in China. I grew up in a time when China was third world. It was a place where poor people lived and everybody was poor. And now they have people buying cars like mad, and the electric cars that are being put in, half of them are going into China. But the biggest difference between China and the United States is in the electric buses. In the United States, we may have 1,000 electric buses on the road. We're ramping up production very, very fast. By very fast, I mean relative to the amount that we've got on the road, which means that we may be able to manufacture 1,000 electric buses a year, so that at the rate that we're making them now, we might double the number of buses next year. That's fast increase. China has manufactured 300,000 electric buses in the last 3 years. They're making them at a rate of about 100,000 a year. Electric buses are more expensive than diesel-operated buses by about 60%. But they have far less maintenance on them, and the result of that is that the payback time is short. It's 5 years, perhaps, or 6. And so there's a good economy in switching to electric buses. China has been doing it fast. China has been doing a very fast switchover that puts it into a position where it can compete on the world market against the United States or anybody else who comes along. The same is true of cars. The same is true of wind turbines. The same is true of solar panels. And the same is true of a lot of other things. And I think that we should think about what that means, because what we're doing by following the policies that we have been following has been putting America back. It has been making America small again, if you will. We're not making ourselves great by sticking to 19th century and early 20th century technologies. Okay, I've ranted, I'm sorry. Okay, the next item that we have, still Saturday, October 27th, is from Clean Technica. We have a picture here that I will put up. The title of this article is Asia Pacific to see 355 gigawatts of solar and offshore wind boom in the next 5 years. This is kind of stunning. 355 gigawatts of solar and offshore wind might be the equivalent of 100 large nuclear power plants, which would be 20% of the nuclear power plants worldwide in terms of its output. And the text I have for this is the Asia-Pacific region is expecting to add a further 355 gigawatts of new PV capacity over the next 5 years, despite expectations that installations will actually decline this year. And the region's offshore wind industry is predicted to grow 20-fold over the next decade. I should mention, when you hear somebody say that something is going to grow 20-fold, you have to know where you're starting. If you're starting like the United States is now, with 5 offshore wind turbines, growing 20-fold would mean that we'd have 100, which would mean that we would not have caught up with a number of European countries yet. And maybe we will have it multiplied 20-fold in the next decade. I don't know. But China doesn't have, or actually Asia, the Asian area doesn't have a lot of offshore wind farms at this time. Nevertheless, 355 gigawatts of solar and offshore wind power is a pretty impressive amount of capacity. We are up to Sunday, October 28th, and we have an item here. I want to thank Tad Montgomery for bringing this to my attention. This is in a publication called Nation of Change. And the title is Why Canadian Tar Sands Oil May Be Doomed. There was some material in here that I didn't know. At current prices, $19 per barrel, Canadian tar sands oil producers are losing money on every barrel of oil they dig out, despite signs earlier this year that the industry would, quote, turn profitable in 2018, end quote. A much more likely scenario at this point is a 4th straight year of losses. I want to explain that $19 per barrel figure. In order to get oil from tar sands out of where it's dug out of the ground, they have to ship it. It is not worth a lot of money because it's full of sand and other stuff. It's not very good oil. It's really dirt cheap because there's a lot of dirt in it, if you will. It's expensive to ship. A lot of it has to be treated before it can be shipped. So if oil is at $70 a barrel, tar sands oil might be at 20. And at that price, they're not making money. And when they're not making money, what they're doing is they're pulling the oil out of the ground and selling it. So they have a turnover of money, so they have cash flow because they've got large fixed investments and they've got to cover the cost of financing those investments. The financing was done years ago. So like a lot of companies, like a lot of organizations in the oil industry, these tar sands companies are in trouble. And as I said, about a year and a half ago, Rex Tillerson, or at any rate ExxonMobil, said they were writing off $3 billion worth of Canadian tar sands oil. So this is not a surprise to me. The $19 a barrel was a surprise to me. I have to admit that. That item behind me, I don't know if I showed that to you. That is solar panels in China standing in the middle of a lake, and that had to do with the 355 gigawatts of solar and wind in the last article that I talked about. Okay, we have a picture here of the Kaskawulsh Glacier. Let me put that up. And the item that we have is called Dry Lakes and Dust Storms. Dramatic changes to the Yukon glaciers are a warning for the planet, researchers say. This is from cbc.ca. The Yukon's enormous glaciers are thinning very quickly, creating huge environmental changes. The dramatic changes are an early warning of what climate change could mean for the rest of the planet, according to researchers. That glacier doesn't look like it has a lot of mass to it. And it if you look at the ice in the foreground, you can see that it is apparently rapidly melting. This is an old glacier, and it's an indication of things that are going wrong. On this show, we have watched glaciers. In fact, we had an item several years ago about a glacier in Bolivia that had been a place where people would go to ski, and the glacier is gone. The ski resort is closed. The villages that depended on the water coming from the glacier to feed the lakes where they got fish have disappeared, because the fish have disappeared, because the lakes have disappeared. Things are changing, and this is not a good sign. Our next item, I'm just going to go, I probably could have commented on that more, but our next item is from Politico. The title is Billionaire Brawl, Warren Buffett versus Sheldon Adelson in Nevada. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway owns NV Energy, a government-regulated monopoly that ranks as the state's largest utility. And Adelson is bankrolling a campaign to break up the company and take control of where his power-hungry casinos buy electricity. This is a difficult story to sort out for a bunch of reasons. Conservatives like the idea of a free market, which means that they generally don't like monopolies. They don't like things that are government regulated. But taking away the government regulation is not necessarily always good for a free market. It's not necessarily always good for the people. The costs of electricity to casinos are pretty high. That's one of their high costs. And they want to buy casinos from somebody other than Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, you would think that would be a company that was interested in capitalist country like the United States, but they want to maintain the monopoly. It's hard to see where ordinary people are going to benefit or be hurt by this. It's an interesting thing to watch. We are up to Monday, October 29th, and I have a picture here for you of horsepower in days of yore. Cosmos has brought us this. The title is Energy Transitions Are Nothing New, but the one underway is unprecedented and urgent. This is an opinion piece, and I'm just quoting directly out of it. As a historian who has studied the oil industry's earliest years and petroleum's role in world history, I believe that keeping the world habitable for future generations will depend on a swift transition to more sustainable energy sources. And really, that's, in a nutshell, the situation that we are facing. We have a problem where the emissions of the oil industry and coal and gas are causing all kinds of trouble. But the people who own those industries are not interested in stopping production just because people in the future are going to have problems as a result. And some of the things I will mention later on in this broadcast, one of the things that I have been hearing is profoundly disturbing. But I think we should go on. We have an item here from North Carolina Health News. Smithfield announces plans to cover hog lagoons, produce renewable energy. Smithfield Foods says it plans to cover most of the hog lagoons it has in North Carolina to generate renewable energy and protect the waste pits from heavy rains. During Hurricane Florence's rains, the lagoons caused environmental problems. Well, environmental problems. The contents of these lagoons, which was manure from pigs, got all over the place because the lagoons overflowed. They can leave the lagoons and have them be environmental problems in the future and have them be relatively unproductive. Or they could do what they're doing, which is to cover them over and use the gas that comes out, the methane, to produce power. Well, if they do that properly, they're going to be getting two things. They're going to be getting power and they're going to be getting compost. The gas that is produced, that they're going to be using for power, would otherwise leak into the atmosphere. So this is actually reducing climate change by burning the methane that these hog lagoons would otherwise release. And actually, the whole business of biodigesters and making electricity of it is it's a big issue. It's an issue that people could really we should spend more time on this. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said that it believed we could have 11,000 farm-based biodigesters in this country. That's 11,000 farm-based. That doesn't count the ones that could be used for municipalities for dealing with their waste, and there would be scores of thousands of those. The potential for this is environmentally very sound. I've mentioned this before. My son, who lives in Kenosha, Wisconsin, was involved in installing centrifuges in the Kenosha waste treatment facility so that the facility could have a predictable approach to biodigesting. And what they're doing is they're digesting the waste, human waste, in a digester, and then after that it goes into a second reactor, which is called a Pondus reactor, where it is treated with it's treated hot with sulfuric acid. From that it goes into a third reactor where the nutrients that remain are digested again. The result of that is a 30% increase in the amount of methane that's generated. The facility, which had been a big user of electricity and fuel, is now an electricity producer that produces all of its own energy. And it is able to release water that is pure enough that it can be just released into Lake Michigan next to a public beach. And the solids wind up being in bricks that are sold for fertilizer and are certified by the U.S. I think it's the EPA. It might be the Department of Agriculture as a grade A fertilizer, which means that they're turning human waste into something that you could grow carrots in. So, you know, we have reasons to do this that are profoundly important, in addition to just producing energy. Our next item, and I'll put this picture up so that you can see it, is from OZY. I don't know what that publication is. The title is, "He's Turning Lights On in War-Torn Rural Somalia, One Panel at a Time." With a company backed by his own funds, along with those of friends and family, a man named Willick has brought electricity to 1,000 people so far by installing 70 kilowatts of solar panels. A little electricity brings many other benefits, however, including information. This picture of this vehicle is a locally made vehicle in Somalia, apparently. And the driver of the vehicle, I think, is sitting on top of, well, the seat that he's got sitting on is on top of a box, which I believe must contain lead acid batteries. The second vehicle that you see on the right has a headlight, and it wouldn't make any sense for a vehicle powered entirely by sunlight to have a headlight. And I will point out to you that the sun is not shining on these vehicles as they go down the road. There's no shadow. The other thing that I'd like to bring up here is that 70 kilowatts of solar panels is supplying electricity to 1,000 people. That means that each person is given approximately 70 watts, which is not a lot of solar panels. That means that a family of 5 might get one respectably good-sized solar panel. These people are benefiting enormously from a small investment. And I think that's something that we should think about, because people can benefit from very small investments all over the world. There's a huge number of people, well over 1 billion, who don't have electricity, and the coming of electricity could have a profound effect on their lives. Okay, we are up to Tuesday, October 30th, and we have an item here from Clean Technica. This is a very interesting item to me. The title is U.S. Coal on Track for Record Capacity Decline, Closing 15.4 Gigawatts. That is the equivalent of 15, well, coal has a capacity factor that is below that of nuclear in the United States. So that's maybe the equivalent of closing 16 or 17 or even 18 large nuclear power plants, except they're coal plants that are being closed. The closure of coal-fired power plants across the United States is currently on track to set a new record this year, with at least 22 plants going dark. A 15.4 gigawatt decline, according to a new report published by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysts. This is particularly interesting because Donald Trump had promised that he would bring coal back. And obviously, you know, after Obama's war on coal did all the damage that it did, supposedly, the first years that he has been in office, or the second year that he's been in office, actually, there was a decline last year, but it wasn't as bad as this. The second year he's in office has the biggest decline on record, bigger than anything that happened during President Obama's administration. And I wonder what he's going to tell the miners, you know, in Wyoming and West Virginia and so forth about that. What kind of explanation he might have. Okay, our next item is from CNN. And what we have here is a picture of an African elephant, according to the text. This is an article with the title, "This is the Last Generation That Can Save Nature," the World Wildlife Fund says. Global wildlife populations have fallen by 60% in just over 4 decades. As accelerating pollution, deforestation, climate change, and other man-made factors have created a mind-blowing, that's in quotes, mind-blowing, crisis, the World Wildlife Fund has warned in a damning new report. And you know, we can see this all through nature. You don't have to go very far to see that things are way out of balance. They have been for years. Vermont still has its hemlock trees. I wonder how long that's going to last. There's problems with, we've talked about this on a number of occasions, the fact that moose are being killed by ticks. Not by diseases carried by ticks, they're being killed by the ticks. And the numbers of mooses being killed by ticks are huge. They say that something like 80% of all the moose calves born in New Hampshire die because of ticks. Hunters can't go hunting anymore for moose. They can hunt for deer. The deer know how to groom for ticks, but the moose have never in their evolutionary past lived in areas where there are large numbers of ticks, so they lost any inclination, any knowledge, intuitive knowledge of how to groom for them. They don't groom for them, and the moose have been found with as many as 70,000 ticks on them, and the female adult, fully gorged winter tick, which is the one that's causing the most trouble, is about the size of a grape. My brother, who's a tracker, has told me in the snow, moose are very easy to track in Vermont and New Hampshire because of the blood they leave. This is just a tiny part of nature being destroyed by climate change. And there are people who are going to tell you that it doesn't exist. Or kind of, don't worry about the man behind that curtain. It's very sad, I think. Okay, we have another item also from CNN, same day. This is Tuesday, October 31st, and the title is "More than 90% of the world's children breathe toxic air," a report says, as India prepares for its most polluted season. Around 93% of the world's children under 15 years of age, 1.8 billion children, breathe air so polluted that it puts their health and development at serious risk, according to a report published by the World Health Organization. I think people in Vermont should be aware of the fact, and this is something that Tom and I have talked about on numerous occasions, that people think air in Vermont is clean. In reality, air in Vermont is not all that clean. And the American Lung Association in California did a study that indicates that the cost of medical problems resulting from air pollution in Vermont for the people of the state is probably, just from transportation, it comes to about $480 per person per year. That's medical problems resulting from our burning gasoline and diesel oil for transportation. And that's covered, most of it, by health insurance, taxes, and so forth. So people who don't have the problems, such as emphysema, chronic bronchitis, lung cancer, people who don't have those problems don't think about the costs very much. But the costs are there, and they're heavy. Okay. We're up to Wednesday, October 31st, which from my point of view right now on Thursday morning is yesterday. And this is one of the things I had mentioned earlier, that I had one item was something I found profoundly disturbing. The title of this article is Feds Are Trying to Silence the Kids Suing the Trump Administration Over Global Warming. This is from CNN. The Supreme Court is considering the Department of Justice petition for a writ of mandamus. Federal attorneys question whether the kids have a right to, quote, a climate system capable of sustaining human life, end quote, under the Constitution or public trust doctrine. They are questioning whether people have a right to a climate system that is capable of sustaining human life. We have a right to life, but they're telling us, this is Donald Trump's administration's attorneys, they are telling us that they believe we don't have a right to a climate that will sustain life. And you know, I think this is sufficiently outrageous. I've thought if I were on the Supreme Court and were given an article like that, I think I would ask how many of the people who were in the courtroom as attorneys believed in the article, or supported that particular doctrine. And I think I would tell them that it's so insulting that I was going to put them in prison for contempt, jail for contempt. This is amazing, and it comes at the same time that Donald Trump is apparently saying that he should be able to adjust the meaning of the Constitution in terms of the question of whether immigrant children, children of illegal aliens born in the United States, are in fact American citizens, and he's thinking of doing this basically by a presidential order. And if our Constitution is going to be able to be amended on a fiat basis by the President of the United States, then it's a piece of paper that has no value. And if they're going to claim that a person with a right to life doesn't have a right to the things he needs for life, and even, we have to make a distinction here. I'm not saying that people should necessarily have a right to food because they need food to live. That might not be a bad idea, but this is a matter in which the things that they have been taking for granted are being destroyed. So they don't have any protection under the Constitution from destroying the things that they have always had, that people have always had throughout history. And that is, I think, outrageous. Anyway, I'm going to go on. I want to get these last two items in. We have an item also Wednesday, October 31st from PV Magazine USA, and the title is New Renewables, Nuclear, Bring Down U.S. Electricity Emissions by Approximately 13%. Analysis by the DOE, the Department of Energy, puts some numbers on how zero carbon energy has brought down U.S. power sector emissions. It is almost all wind, which went from, the thing bringing the emissions down is almost all wind, which went from 0.4% to 6.3% of generation over the period of 2005 to 2017, and solar, which increased from approximately 0% to 1.9%. This is basically what it says. They are including nuclear in there, I think not because it has grown. In fact, it hasn't. Nuclear is a declining power source. We have in 2005, honestly, I don't remember how many nuclear reactors we had in 2005. It might have been 104, but they've been closing, and we have 98 now. Oyster Creek has shut down. It's still licensed to operate, but it's not operating. And that license is being given up, so that situation will change. Meanwhile, hydropower fluctuates depending upon what the weather is like. Wind power has gone over a period of 12 years from less than 0.5% to almost 6.5%. Solar power has grown from 0% to 1.9%. It's actually over 2%. And another thing that I should point out about this is that the Department of Energy doesn't always count wind power. And at one point, and it was fairly recently, they've admitted that they're counting things wrong, and they're trying to straighten that out. The Department of Energy, for certain applications, has been saying that there is no solar power in Vermont, or was no solar power in Vermont, because for certain purposes it was only counting solar power installations that were 5 megawatts and larger. For other applications it was only counting 1 megawatt or larger. It didn't count anything that was smaller than those amounts. And that meant that if they were doing something for which the 5 megawatt or larger limit was in place, what they were counting counted no solar power in Vermont whatsoever until the Brattleboro landfill array was open, because that's 5 megawatts. Okay, we are up to the last item for the week, and this is from Renew Economy, and it's about the Ning'an solar plant, which you can see there. New South Wales launches, and that, by the way, if you're going to look it up by clicking on that calendar the way I said, it's NSW, launches emerging energy program to replace coal generation. The New South Wales coalition government launched one of the most significant energy transition projects in Australia. The Emerging Energy Program is designed to help replace most of the state's aging coal plants with wind, solar, and storage within 15 years. So what they're saying is they want to have basically almost all of the coal generation that they have in New South Wales. New South Wales is a state in Australia. My recollection is that Australia has 7 states. I could count them, but I don't want to spend time doing that. It's a smallish state, which means it's about the size of Texas, maybe, or larger. States in Australia have a tendency to be really big, and what they're saying is they want to stop using coal. So there you have it. That's Energy Week for the week, and I hope you come back next time. And I hope Tom is well next time, and we can be with you together. I'm going to put this thing up because it is my message. Have a perfectly lovely week. Bye.